It's great to be joined today by Jeff Speck, who is a city planner and also author of Walkable City: How Downtown Can Save America One Step at a Time. Jeff, I've been doing a lot of reading lately about, I've had this experience where sometimes when I will visit what we would colloquially describe as suburbia, sometimes this applies to sort of more rural areas of the country, etc. There's a sort of intangible where it feels to me like something about the way life is arranged there feels sort of not good. And as it turns out, there's been a lot of writing trying to really drill down and assess what some of those components are. So, for someone who maybe is not too familiar with this field of study, how can we generally introduce them to some of the concepts that city planners think about that can lead to maybe some less than perfect sort of feelings in what we describe as suburbia? What types of things do city planners think about?
Isn't it interesting how, well, let me just say first, as a city planner, I came to city planning as a human, and I
Interesting.
think as a city planner, I still can't help but think about these things in human terms, and still the reactions that I have to these sort of places are very similar to what you describe in terms of feelings, actual feelings of comfort and happiness in certain types of environments, and then feelings of anxiety or being no place in other types of places. The other thing I would say is you mentioned some of the rural places giving you this feeling. My guess is that it's developing rural places that give you feelings of discomfort. I presume you're not troubled by pure nature or small town America?
No, not particularly, I guess. And sort of the thoughts I have when I travel through different types of differently sized cities, rural areas, small towns, etc., is sort of thinking back to the earliest of what we could call cities in human civilization. And correct me if I'm wrong, not much about suburbia today resembles the earliest human cities, does it?
Correct. And let me say where I was going with this was that it's particularly disturbing to me to visit these developing rural places because it's there that you see that the default mode for land development in America is to create these places that we really can't care about,
Hmm.
this model of sprawl. And I think it's important to distinguish that this is a discussion not about cities versus towns or towns versus villages, or villages versus country, or even city, even the man-made versus nature. It's really a discussion about two different models of development, and the fact that there are only two tested models of development in the world. Now, there are 100 different ways to make a city, and we've tried many of them, maybe 1,000 different ways. But there's only two that we've tried by the thousands. And one of them is the traditional neighborhood, which appeared as early as, let's say, um, you know, 10,000 years ago with Jericho and the other first non-nomadic settlements.
Hmm.
And then it continued all the way as the normal way of building places until the middle of the 20th century. A neighborhood can sit alone in the landscape and it's a village. It can grow together with other neighborhoods and make a town. And that town can grow in density, intensity, and size and become a city. But all the places that you can name that exist from before, let's say 1930 or 40, actually, because we didn't do much building. We didn't do much building during the Depression or during the Second World War. But almost any place you can name that was developed before mid-century was developed according to this neighborhood model. And so we planners define neighborhoods as being compact, diverse, and walkable. Almost any neighborhood you study is about a 5-minute walk from edge to center or a half mile across, with some variety, but that's a pretty steady model throughout history and across cultures. Um, in neighborhoods, and this is what makes them neighborhoods, you find places to live, places to work, places to recreate, places to worship, places to go to school, places to shop, and they're all within walking distance.
And
And you
Jeff,
might drive, or
if
you
I
might
may, just to
bike.
sort of take this piece by piece, you seem
Yeah.
to sort of be getting at what was number one on my list, which is this concept of single-use zoning in suburbia,
Yes.
right? Which
Yeah.
prevents the possibility of what you're describing now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to break it all down to say, okay, how can we distinguish between these two types of places? One being the traditional neighborhood and the other being suburban sprawl, is simply that sprawl was a whole new model, invented, not inherited, not something that developed naturally in response to man's needs, but something that was invented after the advent of mass automotive use around the presumption of universal automotive dependency.
Mm.
It wasn't so much seen as a dependency, it was something we celebrated, right? We had this tremendous new tool of this automobile, and we were going to celebrate it and design our world around it. And in so doing, we kind of inadvertently created this landscape where A, it's not efficient or in any way pleasant to get around any other way except driving. And B, it's been incredibly expensive, incredibly, doesn't pay for itself in terms of the infrastructure you have to lay at this low density, autocentric way to support it. And then it's actually very bad for our economy and our health. And that we are, spending tremendous amount of spending a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of money getting around in vehicles when actually before we were dependent on these cars, we were dedicating a lot less of our time, of our money, and our health to moving around. And what I mean by health is, clearly evident in this country, a obesity crisis that epidemiologists are blaming on the sprawl settlement pattern, an epidemic of car crashes that's killing as many people as, it's the single greatest killer of healthy Americans. Asthma killing 3 times as many people as it did in the 90s, almost all coming from car exhaust. And then a whole bunch of social ills that have been well documented, particularly by Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone, where he found out that every 10 minutes you add to your commute, you are 10% less likely to participate in activities within your community.
Hmm.
So this great kind of social emptiness as well that's come from all the hours that we've tied ourselves to driving around.
So you've talked a little bit about the single-use zoning and sort of described that qualitatively. And I'd love for you to give our audience sort of an overview, some of the car-related dynamics of suburbia. There's this tiered or hierarchical traffic distribution, right? The local road into the main road, into the
Yeah.
highway, and often interfacing with the highway in a less than ideal way. And also the entire sort of parking lot paradigm of suburbia is also a big factor here, right? I mean, give us a sort of overview of that.
Well, the third aspect of the neighborhood that I was going to mention, it being walkable, compact, diverse, and walkable, is a function principally of the fact that there's a street network, what's called a networked system of blocks, right? And one of the things that distinguishes, if you picture kind of pure suburbia in your head, not the suburbs, but suburbia, auto-oriented suburbia in your head, one thing you might realize is that it doesn't really have a block structure. It has what's called a dendritic structure or a branching system, where most trips, if you're actually getting anywhere, go from the local road or the parking lot to the collector road, to the arterial, to the highway, and then back down again. And actually, one of the advantages, I'm speaking a little bit facetiously, but one of the advantages of this system is that you can actually map every trip because each trip can only go one way. And you can be absolutely sure that people, when they're getting from point A to point B, will take a certain path because they only have one choice. Now, the great irony of sprawl is that this system that was developed around automobile use and meant to optimize automobile use is actually worse for driving. Because when you have a network, you have many different paths from any destination to any other. In the dendritic system, if you have one, if one car has an engine fire on the collector road, your entire community shuts down for the day, right? But in a network, of course, there's multiple paths from anywhere to anywhere else. The other thing, of course, is that a network supports walking much better than this dendritic system in which, as you describe, there are these large areas of single use that are big and they're separated from each other. And therefore, what you can get to on foot is extremely limited. I was once interviewed by a radio show guy who, no, it was television because he had cameras. It was like the local news in the Miami area. And he thought it'd be fun. This is after my book with Dwani and Plater Zyberg called Suburban Nation came out. And he thought it would be fun to interview me in his local coffee shop, but to walk to the coffee shop and meet me there. And he arrived like an hour after he left his house as this sweaty, really hot, unpleasant mess, as intended, because it was just, he was living in a community where actually no one had ever considered the walk as a possibility. And let me say then, coming full circle, that this conversation isn't one between city and town and country and nature. It's one between whether your landscape is dependent on automobiles or facilitates the use of other ways of getting around. And that's the best, clearest way to distinguish suburban sprawl from all other models, not to confuse it with the nice turn-of-the-century suburbs and many other good models that we have. Is the average citizen required to use a car to live their daily lives? Now, many people in cities, of course, have cars, but the car is more of an instrument of freedom than a prosthetic device. And it's something that we use on occasion, like me living here in Brookline, Massachusetts, a very close-in suburb surrounded by Boston, right on the Green Line where the train runs in my street out there. We have a car. We have a place to put it in the street, and we use it. But mostly we're walking, taking transit, biking, getting around other ways because our environment allows that. Now, as to parking lots, clearly, if you are designing a city around the presumption of everyone driving and parking where they go, you end up dedicating a tremendous amount of your landscape to the storage of automobiles. And in most American cities, the single greatest land use is vehicular parking.
The book, I will tell you once again, is Walkable City, How Downtown Can Save America One Step at a Time. Now, Jeff, if only the Green Line was reliably faster than walking, that would also be something else that I would really cheer on. We've been speaking with Jeff Speck. Absolutely fascinating topic, and I hope people check out your book. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Hey, my pleasure.